All right, Kyle, I'll say the name of the show, and then let's hit the Zeppelin.
Okay.
Zeppelin.
Quiet on the set. Quiet on the set. Here we go. We're going live in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the semifinals Mega Update Show Extreme 2023. 1, 2, 3.
Go, Chris.
What?
I don't know. Here we go.
I thought we were doing
I love
Zeppelin.
that you added the extreme to the end of that.
Don't make you dance. Don't make you groove.
I don't know the song, so I can't.
Zeppelin?
I
mean,
also
I
don't.
know
I've
who
never
they
listened
are.
to
Kyle
Zeppelin.
Abdo has never listened to classic rock.
I know.
Really?
What
Yes.
do you listen to?
Metal and like.
Okay.
I
I think
knew
we
that.
talked about
Yeah, we
it
did talk
before.
about this. Yeah.
Yeah. But like a very specific kind of metal.
Yeah, it's very specific. You listen to it. Well, you listen to
you,
a song.
You sent some to me,
Yeah,
and
I
it was
sent
actually
All right,
pretty
hello, everybody,
Hello, everyone.
and welcome.
Are we live?
Yeah,
Oh,
hey,
okay.
TTT
Hello.
live.
Oh, TTT.
Can
live.
I?
We're gonna be yep.
I want to go back to this because I really do appreciate that you added the extreme to that. The mega update show extreme. Is
Yeah.
that how you worded
The
that?
semifinals Mega Update Show Extreme 2023.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with the semifinals Mega Update Show 2022.
Do you remember Billy Mays? Rest in peace.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
He used to do that with the OxyClean. He'd be like, OxyClean, extreme. And then he would do the commercial. I don't know. It's
All right.
All right, let's
Excellent
talk
intro.
about, yeah, we're going to talk about the
snap.
day number 2 for teams, day number 1 for the individuals of why are you laughing over there, Kyle? Oh, I love you, Jordan.
All right.
Yeah,
Let's get serious.
Here's what I think is interesting. All right. So this is the first time they've ever run teams and individuals on separate days with like a
Yeah.
separate schedule.
A stagger.
Yeah. So the team story is almost done, right? So they're 2 days in. They're 4 events out of their 6 in, and so like we know most of the team standings. Obviously, there's some kind of curveball events tomorrow. We have a big
Yeah.
strength test for them, but like the teams are almost done. It's kind of interesting, but the individuals, they're only 2 events in. Like they're 2 events in out of 7
Well,
scores. too.
so the teams have already had what we always call their moving day,
Yes.
right?
Right.
That middle day is usually the moving day, but in reality, it probably will be tomorrow for a lot of the teams. Obviously, you
think
already have
because of the strength
because
event?
of the strength event. I think that's going to move the leaderboard around quite a bit because with teams, as we all know, when you have one person that can't move the barbell well, or let's say if it was a 1RM event, they can't hit a certain weight, it really does change the leaderboard.
I know this hasn't happened yet, but let's just quickly touch on the fact that the female team final barbell is 235 pounds. I feel like that out of like 315 for the men and 235 for the women, I don't feel like is a equivalent.
It's not, but to be fair, in the past, they've always had it where it was skewed too heavy for the guys compared
True.
to the girls. The girls always had it.
Hey, so now we're finally making up.
Yeah, yeah,
We're
we're making
switching.
up.
We're switching it.
Hey, 2 wrongs don't make a right here. Let's just be clear. No, I think they push the envelope for the women. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how many teams actually get even 1 rep at that 235 bar
I
tomorrow.
think that it won't be as many as they assume, but we also saw that with some of the individual events. I think they assumed everyone would get burpee box jump overs today, which we'll talk about. They didn't.
Do you think that they thought that many people would get time capped on event 1?
And exactly the same thing, event 1. Again, we'll get to it in a second, but I think that they assumed a certain thing when they tested these workouts. The problem is I think that if CrossFit are to test these things well, they would do it in different environments, like that exact flooring, that exact mat, and with multiple athletes. It can't be some athlete that, for a man that weighs 220 pounds or a female that weighs 175 pounds, you need to test it with the averages. So 140 pounds for the women and maybe 185 pounds for the men, because in a sled event like that, it changes the game.
Well, talking about event 1, I think it's going to be very interesting to see some of the kind of post hoc or the afterward analysis where people correlate body weight to finish in that one. And I really think there's going to be probably not like a 1-to-1 direct correlation, but I would be willing to bet that heavier athletes are going to finish better, probably more so on the female side. Because again, this is another event where I think the women's 185 or 180 sled was just disproportionately heavy compared to the men's 225 sled.
It looked like the women struggled way more than the men did. It looked like the men were just like pulling it. Like it was hard for them, and there's hard for a bunch of them, but they were pulling it and it was moving. Where the women were just like stuck in mud. Almost
Someone said that's. Will says that's a Sorry. Will says
Long
that
day,
wasn't a
folks.
sled. That was a piece of paper.
It was.
That's fair.
Well-
So let's go ahead and just jump in. We can talk teams too, but event one for the individual. So most people saw that workout and they assumed it was an endurance event just because of the 30-minute time cap. So for CrossFit, a 30-minute event is an endurance event.
For sure.
However, what we saw out there was not necessarily an endurance event for most people. It came down to how fast they could move the sled.
Here's the reality of that
100%.
event. You could have removed the Echo Bike, the Assault Runner, and the Ski Erg, and the finish order would be exactly the same. If you just said, what, nine laps of sled pull for time,
For sure.
Yep.
you would have the exact same finish order
Or
in that
within
event.
a few
Yeah,
places.
maybe
for sure.
maybe you have like 1 or 2 shifts at most.
Yeah.
So basically, they created a test where they nullified a good portion of it. But I do think looking at it on paper, I looked at that and I was like, damn, this is an
I
endurance
loved
test.
it.
Yes.
We talked about this before.
Jennifer Gatz brings up a good point. They didn't stream it.
They didn't stream that
Oh,
event.
No,
so
they did
now
not.
we're talking
No.
about it. No one
didn't
one's able
saw
to
it?
see it.
They didn't
my
stream that
gosh.
event, and they won't.
Spoiler
they won't
alert.
Stream.
So
Yeah,
this
they
is
won't stream
maybe
Linda.
why they didn't stream it, because it ended up being most of the females, especially in the first few heats, stood there and looked at the sled. Like they could not
Yeah.
pull the sled, and everyone. I think only 4 females finished. Is that
No,
correct?
I think it was a few more than that because
Was it?
Allison
10.
Rouse, I think,
10.
was
10.
10th.
Yeah, she was
and
10th,
she
and
was
she was the last
She
one to finish.
she got the sled over with like 0.001 left
Yeah.
on the clock.
Yeah, yeah.
So 2 people finished it in heat 1, and I think there was only 2 in heat 2. So then
Yep.
that would mean that 6 finished or 5 plus.
Wait,
a
now
cap.
Julian's saying he did see it.
Well,
Was it
there
streamed?
was
There were
no.
clips?
So people were live streaming it on their own Instagrams, I
Oh,
believe.
nice.
But CrossFit was not live streaming it
Got
at
it.
all.
Okay.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
You got to get on that Cerna feed.
Thanks, Julian. But to that point, like even if there are 10 out of 60 people that are finishing the event, I don't think that they wrote the event thinking that 50 people would hit the time cap. And by the way, for those that didn't get to see it, it wasn't like they were a rep away or a pull away. People were not even
Laps.
on the ski erg in that event. Like
Yeah.
there were female athletes that could not get through the second sled because they were moving it maybe an inch or 2 at a time.
I also think it's interesting that they called it a hand over hand sled drag. I'm curious if when they sat down and tested it and came up, they're in the war room and coming up with the workout, if their thought was that those sled loads would actually be hand over hand sled drags where someone's standing there with their feet planted, dragging the sled versus what we saw, which was like the hand over hand was like re-gripping and then basically dropping into the bottom of the squat and driving out with the hips.
I think I saw one dude do hand over hand. It was like that Austin guy and like I don't know whatever
Yeah.
heat. And
Yeah.
he was
Everyone
like,
else, it was a max.
it
effort
was a
pull.
max effort pull every single time.
Imagine, so that sled's 225 and you got friction on the ground.
Yep.
If you're a 225 pound athlete or a 230 pound athlete, which is probably about as big as an athlete's going to be here, then you might be able to hand over hand pull it.
Yep.
But if you're not the same weight as the sled, then the likelihood that you're going to be able to just anchor yourself to the ground, expect your feet not to slip, and then hand over hand pull it is just super unlikely.
We got a comment. Will says, was the issue a weight discrepancy or that men are generally taller and can get lift on the front of the sled,
That's
which
a really
means
good question.
less friction?
Probably a little bit of both,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah, so we saw 2 things. One, those that were a little bit taller could get the front end of the sled a little bit higher. We keep calling it a sled. For those that didn't see this, I actually am not sure what the material
it's
is.
leather.
It was some kind of like Teflon or leather or something that they put underneath, right? So that you got your 4 plates or 5 plates stacked underneath like this leather piece that was just sliding on the ground. The problem with that is that most of the athletes we'll talk about this too with different lanes, but in some of the lanes, I don't know if it was
it
uneven
get
or
crumbled
whatever.
up?
It got crumbled
Yes.
up.
Yeah, and they had to go back and
Literally folded underneath the
So
plates.
there were in every heat, certain lanes would get folded up. So you think about this leather piece, or like if I'm looking at this comforter and it's folding up underneath the plates, it makes it exponentially
I
harder
knew we
to
should
pull.
do this on the bed, dude.
That's why we did it.
That actually happened to one of our athletes. So Annika Greer, who was in
Yeah, multiple.
the last heat, her in her very first sled pull, hers got folded up somehow. And I'm still not clear on how the thing folds over on itself or like how that exactly happened, but it did. And she didn't know, and it does not move once it gets folded over. And she was like basically like getting into a squat and tugging, and it was moving like 3 or 4 inches. She realized after doing about 10 of those tugs that the sled wasn't moving because it was folded. She walked out there, unfolded it, and then proceeded to
able to
finish the
move it.
rest of the workout. Not finish the rest of
yeah.
the workout, but move well through the rest of the workout as a result of that.
I mean, I watched a bunch of people pull the sled. Well, whatever it is, the sled with basically half the plates off of the sled and being dragging the plates across
Really?
the floor. Yeah, because it would just move underneath the plates. So I don't know if that was a better move or not, but they're like, man, the
Well,
amount
now
of friction on that thing.
Think about how many different sled variations we've now seen at like semifinal level competitions or games level competitions. We've seen all kinds of different things. You've seen the turf sleds at the games that are like the little wedge, you know, that they've had the prowlers, and there've been problems with both of those. Then we've had the torque tanks. And I remember in when we were in Vegas for West Coast 2 years ago, there were problems with some of the torque tanks. Some of them, like the wheels didn't get installed correctly and they were moving down the lane sideways.
They were like, yes, go
and
inside.
they honestly didn't have like enough resistance on them. So they loaded them with weight, but if you load something with wheels with weight, it doesn't really change the resistance that much because there's no friction. And then now we have the piece of leather with something attached to it, and there's problems with that. So like, you mentioned this, I don't know if it was when we were on the podcast or before we got on the podcast, but like testing sled drags, a hand over hand sled drag in this semifinal format, I think it's important. Like, it's a really good test for, you know, to build in something like grindy in the middle of endurance test, but we have yet to find an implement that works well. What we're going to see next year are going to be tires. They're going to have random
Did
tires.
y'all see Lane 13?
Yeah.
Well, that was the
here's
next.
what was weird is because I'm barely paying attention. I'm just trying to keep my camera in focus, so I don't know what's going on half the time. And I just heard the announcer go, "Wow, what did he say, Kyle?" He's like, "Lane 13,
Yeah, like
but had a lot of luck here.
Lucky lane
So was there
13.
like a-
yeah, there was. I mean, that lane basically had no friction in that sled, and that lane moved so well, and it didn't matter who was in that lane. Like, they won the heat almost every single time.
Was it 4 out of 6 that
Someone
were
in the
top
chat
3?
said that Lane 3 was bunk. I like
Lane
that.
3 was
Shout
bunk.
out,
That was-
Jamie.
hey, thank you, Jamie. That was the lane Jake was in.
Yeah, she was running
lane.
around.
There were multiple lanes that
He's in 3.
that had it. So let's step back a little bit, because this is, I think, one of the biggest problems with the sled is
12
that
we started at what? What time did we start, Kyle?
is this too long for you?
No. I just think it's funny that we were this far in. We're still just talking about the sled.
Well, I think
I love it though. Let's keep it going.
These are good things,
Yeah.
and this is not us knocking on the test. Kyle and I both talked about this when the test came out. We loved the construction of this test.
Yeah,
We
I was
thought
actually
it would-
excited about it, too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was
we
like,
thought it
this
would be
is-
a good endurance test, but then when we started thinking about the weight and the type of sled, that was the question mark that came up: is has CrossFit figured out a solution to the sled problem, which has historically been a problem, even though they've ignored it? At the games a couple years ago, they said there was no issue, but we clearly saw the middle lane at the games was slower than all the other lanes. And we went through all the heat lists and looked at that middle lane. And of course, CrossFit made a statement after and said, oh, there's no difference. But there was a huge difference with every guy and every girl that was in that middle lane. The same thing happened here. Lane 13 was easier to move. For every athlete that was in there, they were moving it faster. Like, you could subjectively look at it and see that, but if we went back and looked at the actual numbers, I think the same thing would be true. And there were other lanes that were a little bit harder to move. The other thing is that those athletes that got in dry lanes that did not have the dark spots on them, the sled was moving a little bit faster.
You talking about at the games or here?
No, here.
Yeah, here.
So,
Right.
so
Dry
last
lanes?
night they
like-
went through and cleaned the floors,
Yeah.
which they should, right? But getting the bottom of that leather spud sled wet made it so it was a little bit more sticky. And then you mix that with some of the chalk that people were using, and you basically created like glue. That
I don't
would
know
stick
what
the
it was
sleds to the
actually
ground.
on the floor, but you could watch it, and when they went over those darker spots, it just got harder, and then it would get a little bit easier. And then the other thing that was very interesting to me, and I don't know if this was just the way that the athletes felt, but coming down one way was almost always easier for the athletes than going back. And it changed from lane to lane. So those are all things that it's just very hard when you have something like that is there's friction on the ground, to Kyle's point, if you don't have wheels especially, where the friction is going to be different even if the flooring's the same, because of the tape lines, the way that chalk drops, the wetness on the ground, all of those things play a role. And as much as I love a sled event, I think it causes too much chaos in the event to get an objective winner.
Yeah.
Is there a good way to do a sled event?
I don't know. We
Yeah.
were talking about that in the walk over. Like, I just don't know how.
I think maybe the solution here eventually is going to be, have you ever seen those endless ropes?
yes.
Okay, so you know how our sport uses
Yes.
ergs a lot, right? Like, we use ski ergs, we use assault runners, we use rowers, so we use ergs. There's no, like, we're not averse to using ergs for things. So why not take something like one of those endless ropes and make someone get a certain number of calories on the endless rope or a certain number of,
That would
of
be
rotations
interesting.
on the endless rope. And
Yeah.
those things have magnetic resistance that you can turn up, and you can make it just as hard as those sleds out there.
I
If you
guarantee you
wanted
we find a way to bitch about those.
to.
Don't you worry about it. We will.
This is not me complaining about it.
No,
It's
no,
just
no,
I think
no,
moving
people
forward,
are liking it. By the way, they said
Yeah.
they didn't get to see it, so they want to hear some talk about it.
I think moving forward, though, that we need to have those conversations as a community, and then also at CrossFit HQ needs to have those conversations of how can we have a better test so we're getting the best 11 athletes or 12 athletes that are making the games from this region or semifinal, but also just in general, like there were athletes that could have done better if the flooring was easier in their lane.
if it was more even. If
it was even,
the
yeah,
playing
that's a better way to
field
put it.
was more even.
Do you think the weight was too heavy?
I do, yeah. I think
the
that too.
test.
If it's going to
That's
be
what I mean,
their
for the test.
if
Yeah,
it's-
yeah, yeah, for
if
the
it
test.
is their endurance test,
Yeah.
then they should have kept it lighter, so it was a true endurance test where both all three, the Echo, the runner, and the ski played a role.
Yeah.
There were athletes that cruised on the run that crushed the sled, and maybe that's what they wanted. But again, if you need an endurance test in these events, because at the games there are multiple endurance tests, and this wasn't one.
Yeah, I mean, like it almost seemed arbitrary. The machines, they like could have not been there. Like you said, it was like could have been like 9 sled pulls for time or whatever. And they even talked to like Alexis as like her and I were like whatever we were doing, and she was saying that she basically just like pulled back on her paces that she did in training because like there was no reason to go faster. She was like, I have to like conserve myself in order to get to the sled because I have to pull that sled, and that thing is really fucking hard.
I would love to just hear feedback from the HQ team. Maybe that's what they wanted. So we're complaining about it, but maybe they said this is just a sled event.
I hope that next year they have a better sled for the event. The
Yeah.
one thing I'm going to say this just because people didn't get a chance to see this. The thing that was almost consistent across all athletes, they all said their calves and Achilles
yeah.
were completely wrecked after this, which I think you look at that event and you would not say, I think people's calves are going to be destroyed. You look at that and, okay, it's a heavy sled. You're like, all right, their grip's going to be blown up. Their forearms are going to be wrecked. Their lats are going to be destroyed. And like, it's combined with ski erg. So they're, no, it was their calves. I was in the athlete like recovery room afterward, waiting on a table to open up. And dude, everybody that was in there was like, man, my calves are destroyed. And you worked on a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And
They
that
all
was
said the same thing.
The exact same complaint
Yep.
across
Yeah.
the board. So
Just
weird.
leaning forward and then trying to press
I think
away.
it's
on
just
the
like
sled.
you're like plantar flexing so hard against the ground. You're trying to stabilize yourself, and like your calf is just working so hard in order to hold yourself there.
That's what you and I talked about this.
Yeah.
I think pressing your feet, because one of the things that people were saying is their feet were sliding
Yep.
because the sled was so heavy.
Yeah, there's some wipeouts.
Yes,
Yes, there was. Yeah, there was.
they had to press down so hard to get their feet dug into the ground that it blew up their calves.
Yeah, for sure.
It actually was interesting. They said that they were going to no rep those that moved their feet, but that did happen a lot. I think it's just really hard to, like, what are you going to do? Like, how do they move the sled back? And we got a knock on the door. Are we going to have another
Surprise
coach in
alert!
here?
Surprise alert!
We're either being arrested.
Yeah. Hey, you guys are being too loud.
Hey, Adam.
All right,
Adam Rogers.
We've got
Rogers.
another guest in here. Hey, Adam, before we move on to event 2, we're talking about event 1. Do you have any feedback? Have you been watching the live? Have you been?
All right. Well,
Give him a second.
We're trying to lighten the mood after a long day.
Give Adam a second.
Yeah, I think
Um,
we
go
hit
ahead.
it. No.
Yeah.
Do you
Cool.
have anything more?
So event 2, this was another one. Kyle and I, you guys are both named Kyle.
I know.
Wow.
I know.
Kyle Ruth and I have talked
you
about
can just
this.
call me Hab though. It's fine.
We were talking about how much we thought this would also be an awesome test, and I actually really enjoyed it. It was fun to watch. But one of the things that we noticed especially with the female athletes, was how difficult the complex became.
Yeah, I expected that there would, given that we have a field of 60 athletes, it's a way bigger field than we've ever had before at a semi. Actually, that's not entirely true. My first regional, all the way back in the day, had 60 athletes. But
That was a long time ago.
In modern memory,
in my
modern
day.
history, this is the biggest field that they've had. And you know that in that group of 60, given that muscle-ups were only like moderately tested in the qualifying stages leading up to this, you knew some people were going to get bottlenecked there, but I didn't realize it was going to be the level of bottleneck that it was across the board. Because we've even seen this, like they've done ruck muscle ups at Wadapalooza, and dude, all the teams there got through the workout, and they had 2 females and 2 males on it. Like it was one of those things where I was just very surprised that it was as big of a bottleneck as it actually was for people.
You look like you were about to talk. One of the things that maybe the viewer didn't know, but that we had insight to, originally, I thought it was going to be an unbroken complex. You had to do one toe to bar, one muscle up, one ring dip. However, we were told on the floor or beforehand last night that it did not have to be unbroken. So for those that were watching, they saw someone just do one toe to ring and then come down and then do a muscle up and a dip. You could do those and break them up. It wasn't a true like unbroken complex like we think of when we think of like a, one deadlift, one hang clean, one jerk where it has to be unbroken. So just something to take note of. And I think that most of the athletes handled that really well, like especially some of the females who struggled in later rounds. They would jump up, they would do one toe to ring, then come down, and then just combo their muscle up into a dip, which I think makes a lot of sense.
This seems like it was tested more thoroughly than the sled weights in event 1, like we were talking about before, because my guess is they probably originally wrote this for those complexes, those 3 reps, the toes to ring, muscle up, ring dip, to be completed unbroken, right? I think that was their original intention. Then probably through testing, they were like,
it can't be.
There's going to be too many people that are just standing, staring at the rings, having done one complex. There was also something interesting that happened where, the way that it was scored, where your score is your burpee box jump overs only, it made it so that because there were so many people that didn't even get to, there are 0 scores on both.
How many do we know?
men's and
Was it
women's.
11 females that were
That were 0 score?
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't seen the leaderboard
Yeah.
yet.
I can double check right now.
Yeah, Kyle can look. I think it was like 11 or 12 athletes that didn't get burpee box jumps.
So essentially they tied, but
Right.
the way that HQ decided to score it was that they would rank order them based on who did the most work previously, even though they're all 0 scores. So they have a rank order in there, which I think, we've talked about this ad nauseum at this point, but I think what they should have just done is called it the total reps. Just give it total reps. So like when you get through the complex, 1 rep of the complex, right, is 1 toes to bar, 1 muscle up, 1 ring dip. So that's 5 reps when you complete all of that. Then you do your pistols. So that's 20 reps.
So you're at 25 reps when you go to the box jumps.
And then you go to the box jump. So if you get 20 box jumps, then your score for round 1 was 45 reps. That would have just been a much easier way to deal with 0 scores instead of just having zeros on the leaderboard that have a rank order.
It looks like 12.
12.
Tyler says 12.
Yeah, so
Thank you,
12. Yeah, thanks, Tyler. So 12 total athletes did not get to the box jumps. I think is that a problem in the sport? Like if you're your best athletes, or is it okay?
No, that's not a problem, but having them all have a 0 on the leaderboard is a problem for spectators, for people that are looking at the leaderboard and they're like, why do they all have 0s, but this person, who was at the bottom of that 12 is ranked at the bottom, and this person who's at the top of that 12
Right.
Can you
ranked at the
give
top.
them some, like if we were trying to be nice, what's the best?
Adam had some good feedback on this. Why don't you're shaking your head over there.
Chris asked me that before about like what's giving them the benefit of the doubt look like there, but like there is no benefit of the doubt for that. Just change your scoring system to have it be all of the reps. And
Yep. Right.
like they still sort the same way. It doesn't change any standings or like relationships on the leaderboard. Just have the workout scored by the total reps accumulated.
So play this out a little bit, because I actually was talking to one of your athletes, Allison, about this. So let's just say the first round, everyone got through the muscle ups and the pistols, and they did a couple burpee box jump overs. But then the athlete that doesn't get through, let's say they sprinted through, and an athlete got 10 burpee box jump overs in the first round, but then they fail the muscle ups in the second round, get none. But then another athlete gets 3 box jumps in the first round, 3 box jumps in the second round, 3 box jumps in the third round. So technically they've done more work, but their actual score is still slower or less than the person that got 10 in the first round.
We actually, Jake and I talked about this. In hindsight, what he could have done was done 20 burpee box jump overs in the first round.
Yes.
Taken the second round off and done 20 burpee box jump overs
Exactly.
in the third round. And a score of 40 would have been, I
So
think.
Connor had 42 and he was 9th.
There you go.
Yeah.
He would have been 10th, about 10th place.
Now they did say like it's not like an uncommon movement clause thing, but in the spirit of the games, that if they think that you're not accumulating work, they can penalize you after the fact.
Sure.
So somebody came out and asked that, like, hey, what if I just take round 2 off? And they did come out and say, like, hey, we're not going to allow that, basically. But they get around that problem from people trying to game it if they just accumulate all the reps, because then
if every
you can't
rep
take
counts.
the buy-in out.
Yep.
Then
If
you
every
have
rep
to do the
counts
buy-in.
as a
That's what I
point.
wanted to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's funny you say that, because there was an athlete that did that, actually.
Really?
He pretended, I actually don't know because I didn't see his last round, but he got muscle ups on his first round and went through. And then he just like kept pulling to his chest. And I didn't know if he pulled his pec or something.
Mm-hmm. And was like staying with the spirit of the games kind of
but
thing.
attempting muscle ups each time.
Yeah.
So I wonder if I'll have to go back and look at the stream. Yeah, but he kept doing it, but I don't know if it was because he hurt. Right. He was pulling to his. Did you see this guy? Okay. Did he? So
Okay.
did he go back and do his third round? Like,
Okay, so
okay.
The entire time.
He just pulled to his chest.
Okay. My point with that is I didn't know if he sprinted the first round, to Kyle's point, like
Yeah.
do 20, and then he just pretended like he was taking off the
He
second
never
round.
got to burpees.
Okay.
Okay, let's just summarize this by saying that what should have happened is they should have given 1 point, or like 1 rep was 1 rep, and not just count one part of the workout or another part of the workout. The whole thing should have counted, and that would have made the scoring system easier. It would have been easier for them to tell a story to the spectators, which they've talked about how important that is, and we all know how important that is. Like we want the sport to continue to grow, and in order to have a sport grow, spectators have to be able to be engaged. And the only way to do that is to have a leaderboard and a scoring system that makes sense to everybody that's watching the sport. And that didn't make any sense.
Do you think the complex should have been unbroken?
No, because maybe.
I honestly,
I say no, and now I'm saying maybe.
I honestly like. I was kind of excited when it first came out. I thought we were gonna get like an actual gymnastics complex that had to be unbroken. I was like, this is gonna be really cool to see because it's
Yeah.
gonna be really challenging for them, and it's probably gonna like force people to have to like be intelligent about how they break it up and how they take the reps. And then it was like, nah, just do it however you want. I was like, oh, it's kind of lame.
I mean, even then, like the nature of the complex, like kind of like it wasn't in your benefit to break it a ton. Like maybe what ends up happening is like you do your extra toe to ring when you come down from the other one, and then you kind of rest before you do your muscle up. But what did you really gain out of that besides just allowing the muscle up to be a little bit more controlled? I feel like sometimes the toes to ring, if you keep your kip real tight, it almost like creates tension on the straps.
Yeah.
Like it's
For sure.
actually
It
a little
kills
bit
the
beneficial.
swing.
Yeah.
I think it would be just for someone that's their grip is blowing up from the previous workout,
Yeah.
possibly, or something else.
Now,
like
if you
that.
change that and have it be like 10 ring dips or 15 ring dips at the top, and oh, by the way, this has to be unbroken, you can't do 5 and then come down and do 5, that changes things.
How much harder would that workout have been if you had to go 5 toes to bar, 5 muscle ups, 5 ring dips?
See, that complex, unbroken, that is like a games level thing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's what I
Yeah,
picture
yeah,
with that, is like now you have to stay up there the whole time, and if you come down,
You got to start that whole
Yeah.
thing over.
Yeah.
Here has always been my question, though. Is that even worth testing at the games? Because here it goes back to your point. What is spectator friendly, and how do you grow a sport? And as awesome and as hard as we all know that is, when they do things like that half the field fail at, then the person that's just like the lay person that's never seen the sport looks at it and says, I thought these were the best. I thought these were the professionals. And that concerns me for the growth of the sport.
Adam
this
set
is-
his cup down, so this
this is my this is my benefit of the doubt. So like this is
Okay.
Chris's point. So if I'm going to take their side on things,
Benefit of the doubt, turn the mic towards your mouth.
no. The benefit of the doubt side of this is these kinds of things where they push the envelope on performance, and they're trying to make sure that they are like getting people to do things extra, things that they haven't trained, right? In the moment, that year, that competition, there's going to be a lot of people that fail. And if you see a layperson come and see that, like, look at these people, what are they doing? But what's going to end up happening is it's going to push the performance of the current athletes up to the next level in the following 2 to 3 years. So I think if you're taking a long picture view of that, it's actually helping to grow the sport by improving the performance of the athletes on like a bigger picture.
So here's my suggestion then. Tell them what will come out ahead of time so that everyone is already performing at that level, practicing it, safely practicing it. And then at the games, it's a spectacle where then the layperson can watch and say, wow, that's amazing.
I think that still solves the issue of making sure that you're trying to keep these athletes continually challenged.
Yeah.
Right.
And-
Like we've been talking about it for a while. Like Castro did a really good job of like expanding our expectation of what was good from a load perspective, right? Or like what was good from an endurance perspective, having people go for hours on marathon rows, all that. Like he stretched the sport in that aspect. I think Bosman is doing his best to stretch the sport in gymnastics aspect, which is going to be, I think, probably a little bit more set up for like visual failure. Right. There's just going to be a lot of people who are failing to do these extra complicated versions of gymnastics.
But to Brandon's point, I think you increase one of the things I made some suggestions when we had this opportunity to tell HQ, like, hey, these are some of the things that we think should be changed. One of the suggestions that I put in there was simply that you keep the athlete safety at the top as the number one priority, right? And introducing new or novel movements in a competition setting is not keeping the athlete's safety as the priority. Now, you can still keep movement combinations and things like that unknown and unknowable, but people should know the movements that they're going to compete in and doing at high speeds, high capacities, and high volumes. Because if you don't, then you're just leaving people open to potential injury. And I think that's unfair to the athletes, the ones that are out there actually doing the work. So I agree that they should continue to push the boundaries of the sport, but what they should do is make sure that people know what is coming from a movement requirement, movement standard perspective before they go out to compete in it to stay safe.
Yeah. Well, that way it checks 2 boxes. It makes sure that Brandon, like, we get a little bit more exposure so these people aren't making complete fools of themselves with like prospective viewers or like long-term fans, and hopefully looking out for the safety of the athletes.
So what do you guys think about the East Coast being like the first people to like test this, and then the rest of the
Guinea pigs.
world? Yeah, they're guinea pigs, but like, you know, Lauren's going to do this next week. She's got an entire like extra week to practice this, and then the next week has an entire next, like Linda has another week to practice all these things, and like
Yeah, you just can't, like, the people can't compare their scores. And
Right.
and I think as long as people have that perspective, then it's fine. Like, you know, Alexis goes out there and she crushes these events. It doesn't matter what anybody else does in future events when she's comparing herself to other games athletes. It's just going to matter, like, okay, how did I execute? How did I perform? And obviously Adam and her will have those conversations. But I think it's a benefit later on for strategy.
For sure.
But it's not necessarily, like, the times don't matter.
yeah, I don't mean
They don't matter unless it impacts seeding at the games.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, it may, but I'm just saying in general,
I mean, that's
Man,
where my head goes, is because
if that is the case, that
well,
is,
think about that, because now they have all shared tests now,
It won't
right?
be.
So now we're going to get there day one, and they can just say, "Look, you guys all did the same test. Here's your ranking."
Yeah, that makes sense.
Wow.
And so this is
Why'd you have to ruin it in my head?
because it got ruined in my head a week ago when I thought about it.
Good point, Adam. I've got nothing to say back to you.
No, I mean the delay on the test. Usually we always say that, right?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter. You're not competing against them. That in my head was like, well, wait. This is worst case scenario is they actually use this for something in the future.
That is true.
Yeah, I just meant it more from like a practice of the movement, like complex thing. You know, just getting more touches on it and having like their movement like refined.
Yeah, that's the benefit of having coaches at the different semifinals. So, like, you know, Lauren can
Yeah.
talk to you, and you could say all the things that you heard, like the feedback from
For
the
sure.
athletes here, or what you saw, and then obviously she gets to watch it, and she can see what like she can still compare herself to. I know this athlete is the same as me in these movements, and then compare herself that way.
Yeah.
You guys want to talk about team stuff at all today?
I was to say, is there anything else on the event too?
Yeah.
Julian wanted to know why Jake blew up.
On which one?
I was to say which one.
The second one? Well, we have an appeal in, and it's pending. So,
They may have not heard me, so say it.
oh, Julian wanted to know why Jake blew up. We have an appeal. Why Jake got no rep. That's not what you said. Okay, why did Jake get no rep? We're not sure that it was a legit no rep. We have an appeal in, and we should know by tonight.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Well,
Adam.
what we think happened was we think there was a legit no rep, but
On
then
his dip.
on his dip. So the complex was toe to ring muscle up, dip, and Jake did a toe to ring muscle up. Was
Dip.
going for his dip, didn't hit lockout, redid the dip, hit
Hit
lockout.
lockout. Judge said good.
Judge said good. So there was a no rep in there, but Jake fixed it before he came down, so that way he didn't have to do another muscle up. But when Jake came down, the judge still had one up in the air. So we think what happened was it was a miscount. Either he forgot that dip was actually part of the dip and not the actual muscle up, or he just lost track of where he was at in the overall scheme of the reps.
Because the complex is kind of confusing. And
Yeah.
that's one thing to be said for
Man, every single time they've been practicing this, in my head, I always forget about the toe to ring. And so they come down from the dip, and I'm like, all right, hit this muscle up. And they do the toe to ring. Like, oh, forgot about that again.
I think it's awesome that they're pushing the boundaries of the sport with things like the complex, but also it might be unnecessarily convoluted and complex. But
Yeah.
that I'm also biased because I'm pissed off that he got that no rep that I think was probably not valid. Anyway, we have an appeal in. We'll find out. They said we'll find out tonight whether his appeal was granted. Wow, the
How does
appeals
the appeal process work?
this year.
Because that's new, right?
Yes.
It's like the NFL challenge.
I will say that this is an awesome addition to the whole semifinal regional thing, because in the past, if you put in your option for putting in an appeal was basically like you go and talk to the head judge and they're like, your appeal's not granted. Like that was the appeals process.
Your sentence isn't even finished.
Yeah.
No,
No, it's a no. It's a
Get out of
no.
here.
Yeah.
That has
no.
legitimately happened in the past.
It has. Oh man, I don't want to. I'm not going to tell my old stories. Well, but no. So basically, the appeals process now, you go talk to the head of appeals, which they have someone who's in charge of it, and they determine whether your appeal has valid grounds or not. Right, and you get 2 appeals. And if they determine that your appeal has valid ground, you fill out a form. You kind of like write out your whole story, what you want to get out of it. I mean, it's an appeals process. And then they put a bunch of sticky notes on it because I saw all the sticky notes that they had all over them. And then they go and supposedly, and I hope that this is what they're actually doing. They said that they have a camera at each corner that's recording like across this way and across this way so that they can go back and watch every event. And they have it filmed the entire thing. That's what
even
that's
on
what
the
it said.
second field of play,
I
where they weren't live streaming anything. Good
I
question.
hope so. I don't know the answer to that, but
Well,
I do
yeah.
know that one of our athletes' appeals for event 1 was granted.
Yeah.
So they either were just like, yeah, she's probably right, or they
Ashley?
had- yes,
Yes,
Ashley.
Because Jessica got her appeal granted as well.
Oh.
Alexis did not get her appeal granted. And again, like I'm just asking, what are you guys looking at right now? Because I don't know if there's cameras over there.
Yeah.
Because the problem is like there was a lot of judges, and I was there talking to Becky, the appeals manager, for a long time today because I want to get it figured out. There was like a backside of the scorecard for that test.
Yeah.
And some judges really just
Didn't
weren't
fill it
they weren't
out.
filling it out correctly. And so there was athletes who were getting credit for things that they weren't at, and there was athletes who did a lot of work that they didn't get credit for, mostly because there was like a page flip, is my understanding. The problem with all of that and not knowing if there was cameras relevant is you lose track of where the athletes are in relation to each other, and then it's really, really hard to grant an appeal or not if you can't go back and look at video. So that was like part of my question is like, listen, you can watch on the field. Anybody who is watching, if you watch Alexis compared to 2 or 3 other athletes, you know that she's ahead of her. But right now, they're ahead of her on that test on the leaderboard. And so wherever you think Alexis was, that's fine. Like we'll assume that you're right on that. But this is where the appeals process gets me. We can't appeal something with respect to another athlete. But the context of where those other athletes, the relationship to where Alexis was, is why we're appealing. They shouldn't be ahead of her on the leaderboard. And so that's like I don't understand how you get around that. Like the appeals process, I think that
It's a
this
good
is a
addition.
good step in the right direction. I still think they need to take into account a little bit more context, a little bit more like relevant information from what's going on around them, which includes other athletes.
So to that point, I think the other big question that I had, and I did ask Becky, the head of appeals, the same question, but how do you determine? So you grant Jake his appeal. He ended up, as a result of that no rep, he immediately jumped up and tried to do a muscle up and failed it, which makes sense. He'd gone through the entire complex, did an extra dip, jumped up and tried and failed, right? So he steps back, he chalks, he walks up to the rings, he jumps up to the rings and realizes in that moment, he's like, there's no way I'm going to do a muscle up right now. I got a 20-pound ruck on and I'm pretty tired. So he steps back again, rests another 10 seconds, finally gets the muscle up, and then goes into
Jesus. What is happening?
What in the chat say pillow fight?
So essentially, there's like 40 seconds just completely lost, right? Now, how do you know how many reps he was going to get? Because he finished that complex unbroken and should have moved on. And he was the first person off the rings at that point. So how do you determine? He got 8 reps in that round. He got 19 in the first one. Do you do an average between the 2 of them?
No, you can't. I mean, you just can't.
There's
do
no
it.
way. And I mentioned to the head of appeals, I was like, if you guys do accept his appeal, he likely should get some reps in the last round too, because of the extra fatigue from doing all the extra reps on round 2. And she was like, we'll take that into consideration. Now, is that we'll take that into consideration or?
I mean, the thing is as much as I understand what you're saying and I agree with you, and it sucks because it's Jake, and obviously it is what it is.
Yep.
If they did that for every athlete that had that mistake happen, then it's just like complete subjective nonsense of the judge gets to dictate, or even the HQ gets to dictate how long a rep takes when that scenario hasn't happened in real life. So even if a burpee box jump is on average taking 3.5 seconds, we don't know that after all that fatigue has taken place.
True.
So it just becomes, I think, a little too much.
Now, I don't want to brag, but we're sitting in the same room as the one coach, one of the few coaches who's got an appeal to actually, what do you say, flip? Accepted. Ladies and gentlemen, Adam Rogers.
I don't understand. I don't understand the point of that.
He got one.
Oh yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Good job,
Congratulations,
Adam. All right,
Adam.
good job. Good job. Good
Well,
job.
what time is it right now, Chris?
Is it time? Do we have to talk about teams now?
Yeah, I think we just like a quick wrap up maybe on teams because we're already.
How are they feeling? How are the athletes feeling after day one?
Their upper bodies are really wrecked from this morning from everyone I've talked to.
Man, looking at the events and looking at like the sequence of events, I feel like the totality of the test and like the attrition that's going to happen, like it's just going to, like the fatigue is going to keep on building. So test one, everybody, that sled was way harder than anybody expected.
Yes.
And
Sled
so
was super
everybody's
hard.
upper arms, biceps were smoked. Now you get into the ring complex, you might have practiced that while you were a little bit tired, but probably not under that fatigue. It means that you're catching those probably deeper than you expected to. You're probably spending more effort on the dips than you expected to. Now you're going to take that fatigue into Linda tomorrow and you're going to like all those dumbbell reps. And then you're going to take that fatigue,
Try and snatch.
anterior shoulder,
one RM
and
snatch.
pec into 1 RM snatches. So you think about the accumulating fatigue over the course of the weekend. This is just going to keep building.
Hey,
And then
and
you-
that's just day 2.
And then you got to do straight legless rope climbs and wall-facing handstand push-ups and handstand pirouettes.
It's funny because the volume's actually lower than in past years, but the actual impact of these workouts may be higher.
It's so like from a total number of contractions, the volume's lower.
Yeah, and just the complexity of the movement. It's like even though it's only 2 on each end legless rope climbs, after doing all the things Adam just mentioned and what they're going to do tomorrow, it's going to be complicated on
Yeah.
day 3.
I mean, he's always like Bosman's always said that he's not interested in seeing like who can win the battle of attrition. But I feel like with the nature of these
created it.
tests and the sequence of these tests, that's what this is
Yeah.
going to end up being.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be who
It's
can
a different
recover-
type of attrition.
Yeah, who can recover well, who can keep performing as close as possible to their capacity while having to deal with all the sorts of soreness and nicks and tweaks that they might have over the course of the weekend.
Well said, Adam.
Real quick on that note, because this is actually I listened to that podcast. No, this is made me think about it though. Like, what do you guys think about that? Like, I understand to his point. Like, you don't want people to get hurt, but like, shouldn't there be some grindy type old school CrossFit events? Because that's what drew most athletes into it. Like, they did a Fran crush themselves, and they're like, I love this.
No, you know what I miss? And we haven't seen these in so long, but like the 2013 hundreds chipper.
Well, that's what
But that's what I mean. That's
to
my
date,
point.
one of the most well-programmed regional or semifinal or whatever you
And
want to
guess
call
what?
it
Most
workouts.
people could get through it, even though it looked brutal.
Yes.
It was something that was entertaining, and everyone said 100 of each of these things, and they watched the whole thing.
Yeah, and it still holds water today.
Right. But
Like, they could do
meanwhile,
that
people
now
are
and-
missing a muscle up complex today, and it's only 1 rep of each. And I'm sure, again, athletes the layperson's watching and thinking, like, why can't they do this unbroken?
Yeah.
To me, it always comes back to spectator friendly equals more viewers equals more money for the sport equals a better life for the athletes, which is what I care about.
Yeah. Word.
Mm-hmm.
Chris.
Correct.
Chris isn't even in here. Kyle.
Chris went to the
what
bathroom.
do people have to say? And what did the people say?
On the stream yesterday, he was testing recovery.
Ah,
I mean, he clearly is.
Yeah,
I
yes,
mean,
he
for
is.
sure.
If
What's
you
the difference between that and then telling someone that he's not testing attrition? Like, to me, those things,
same,
it's
two
the same
sides
thing,
of the same
right?
coin.
Yeah, I don't know. This year, these semifinal tests, like this is going to be like who can recover, right? Like it was clear as day. Like I didn't hear him say that, but everything last year was basically like, I'm not interested in beating people down. I'm not interested in seeing who can like win the war of attrition. I just want them to be able to showcase things because to Brandon's point, it's the showcase that gets more eyes on.
Yeah, and now this year is I want to see who can win the war of attrition.
I mean, just looking at the tests.
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
What do we have to look forward to tomorrow?
The end of
for the
teams.
for the individuals.
Well, first off, we have the end of teams. So the final 2 events, they'll be done at 6:40.
Yep.
Kyle told me earlier they'll be done at 6:40. So they're gonna
Do we
see who's punching the tickets.
Do we know what events they have left?
Yeah, they have a
the cleans.
clean ladder, which we talked about a little bit at the beginning of the podcast.
I think that's going to be a big mover on the leaderboard.
Yeah, just because of how heavy the
I'm,
female load
I'm
is.
excited to see those females lift those weights.
Same.
It's gonna be really cool.
Same. And then their final event. Now I'm drawing a blank.
They
on the
have
final.
a handstand push-up, rope climb,
That's right.
worm one. It's got like burpees and squats in the worm.
Yep.
I don't know the exact rep
So that'll
scheme.
be
Actually,
interesting.
watching the team do that too was fun to watch. So that'll be a fun one to watch
Yeah.
especially for that last heat of teams.
And then for the individuals start bright and early tomorrow morning.
9
9 a.m. for
Yep.
the individual men, and they start with the 2 kind of back-to-back snatch
No, they do
workouts.
Linda first.
Oh, that's right.
They're
Are you
That's right.
going to
Linda's
try and
first, and
are
then
you going to try and live stream Linda,
Linda
since there's
is-
not going to be a live stream?
Not live stream.
Do you understand how many people would watch that if there was a stream of any sort of quality?
CrossFit podcast is live streaming it.
You could do better.
We can do it, but they'll probably come kick my ass out.
No, they won't.
No, they won't kick you
They
out.
probably pay you money.
I doubt they'll pay me money. They didn't even give me a media pass.
Yeah.
It's worth seeing.
Did you guys hear that, everyone? They did not give Chris a media pass.
It's okay. I don't want a media pass.
He's just saying
It's way
that
cooler to not have one. You know, if we have one, then we're those fucking. We're those freaking people.
All right, Chris, give the mic.
Give the mic to back to Adam, please.
You press the button.
This is Adam's fault.
Yeah.
So tomorrow we'll
Linda.
see Linda. We'll talk about that in a live stream tomorrow. We'll try to keep it a
We'll
little bit
see
shorter.
Linda.
And we
then-
don't see Linda.
Yeah,
I don't know if
and then
anyone else
event-
will.
What do you think of the crowd this year compared to last year?
What do you think of the crowd this year compared to last year?
it's way bigger.
If it follows suit from all the regional experiences I've ever had, Saturday and Sunday are going to be more
Yeah.
crowded.
Yeah, no. It's way bigger. Think about Syndicate last year. Think about Mac last year.
Knoxville was a tough area to go into because you can't fly in cheaply.
It was back-to-back weekends.
Back-to-back
And
weekends.
it was
all,
back-to-back
all of those
weekends.
things are true. There's also way more athletes.
Also, that's what I was going to say.
competing here.
Double the amount of athletes. Orlando is very cheap to fly into from anywhere in the U.S., so I think that plays a role. Great choice in going to Orlando, but I still would love to see more crowds just in general. Chris and I, you talked about this today, right? Again, this is just me on my soapbox, but like we got to go back to how can we draw more viewers, and it can't just be the CrossFit crowd. Like we need fans. We need true fans, and to do that, we need viewer-friendly workouts. Sorry.
Is that the end of And on that note, I think that's it.
All right.
Well, yeah. Is that
Any
it?
other questions?
We didn't really talk about teams at all, but that's
Teams,
it.
Cool.
teams are awesome. Yeah, I talked about our teams are doing great. I'm proud of them.
Good job, TTT CrossFit and TTT CrossFit Black.
Hungry, we gotta eat.
Yeah, we haven't even
You
had
guys are
dinner
crushing it
yet.
right now.
Hey, thank you for joining us.
We'll be back tomorrow.
Thank you for joining us.
Let's send them off with some Led Zeppelin.
Hey, mama said the way you move.
Go make you dance, go make you groove.
Now do some
That's all the
Eminem.
time we got, ladies and gentlemen.
Why is it everyone goes?